Adèle Hugo was the daughter of one of France's most famous writers. She had a good early life, but family tragedy and romantic problems would cause her great sadness. In time, she fell into madness, with many believing this was schizophrenia. So how did this happen to her, and why would she stalk someone for over 15 years? To find all this out, let's go back to the beginning. Adèle Hugo was born on the 24th of August 1830 in Paris, the capital of what was then the Kingdom of France. Adèle was named after her mother, Adèle Hugo, and her father, as you may have guessed, was Victor Hugo. Her parents had 5 children. Their first child, Leopold, was born in 1823, but died in infancy. Next came a daughter, Leopoldine, born in 1824. Another son, Charles, was born in 1826, followed by Francois Victor 2 years later, and finally, Adèle. To properly understand Adèle's life, we need to look at her parentage. As you may know, her father was one of the most acclaimed writers of the 19th century. When Adèle was born, he was an author in his late 20s with a little reputation, but he was working on a certain book entitled The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which would establish his name in French literary circles, and he would go on to write many other famous works. Amongst these, Les Miserables is unquestionably the most famous. Victor's fame as a writer would see Adèle move in literary and cultural circles for much of her life, but as we will see, his political views and other factors would also lead to the family's exile from France. But was it this exile that would lead to Adèle's mental instability, or was it the result of something else entirely? Before we answer that, let's look at her early life. Adèle's early life was privileged. She grew up during a time when France was adopting the new technological innovations that had fueled the Industrial Revolution in Britain since the 1770s. With this came wealth and a new middle class of readers, who could read the kinds of books her father produced. As a result, the Hugos were financially stable, and in time would prosper. Adèle received a good liberal education for a girl by the standards of the 19th century. She also learned to play the piano very well, and mixed with many leading cultural figures of the age, who called Paris their home. As she grew up, Adèle became known for her long dark hair and beauty, and was even painted by some of the capital's artists that knew her father. There is a photograph of her from 1850, not long after the first daguerreotype cameras became available. This reveals a woman of 20, of a handsome visage, though with something of a mournful look, certainly not that of a joyous young woman on the cusp of entering into her adult years in a culturally buoyant city like 19th century Paris. There could be many reasons for her sad look. Perhaps it was owing to her unfulfilled desires, or maybe the family tragedy. In 1846, when she was just 16 years old, she had become infatuated with Auguste Vacquerie. He was 10 years her senior, at 26 years of age. He was also related to Adèle by marriage, his brother Charles having married Adèle's older sister, Leopoldine. Adèle and Auguste appeared to have considered marriage for a time, but the relationship wouldn't last, as Auguste hadn't proposed, and Adèle eventually lost interest. Her eye now wandered to the sculptor Jean-Baptiste Clesinger, but nothing came from this. So, why did Adèle lose interest so quickly? Perhaps her parents had simply disapproved of the potential union with Vacquerie, as the marriage of his brother Charles and Adèle's sister Leopoldine had ended in tragedy. On the 4th of September 1843, Leopoldine and her husband were holidaying near Villequier in Normandy, when their boat overturned. The couple drowned together as a result, with Leopoldine's wet, heavy skirts pulling her down, and her husband died, trying to save her. Leopoldine had been pregnant, and her death left her father devastated. Hugo was travelling at the time, and first learned of the tragedy after reading about it in the local newspaper. Following this, he developed clinical depression and was unable to write for several years. Perhaps the thought of Adèle marrying into the same family troubled the Hugos. These early relationships in Paris in her late teens foreshadowed her tumultuous love life in years to come. Maybe it was because of these early family traumas that Adèle carried a sad look on the day her photograph was taken in 1850. In the years that followed, different things would disturb her and the other members of her family. During a series of revolutions, which swept across virtually every nation in Europe in 1848 and 1849, Charles-Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, a nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who had built and lost a great French empire between 1799 and 1815, was elected president of a newly declared Second French Republic. Unhappy with this constitutional form of power, Charles-Louis dismantled the Second French Republic in the early 1850s and declared himself to be Emperor Napoleon III of the Second French Empire. Adèle's father had been a supporter of the French monarchy in his youth, but by the late 1840s was a passionate Republican. He made his opposition to Napoleon III's seizure of absolute power well known, and the family was forced to flee into political exile in 1852. They did not go far though, relocating to the island of Jersey in the Channel Islands, just off the coast of Normandy in northern France, though they were later asked to move to Guernsey, one of the other Channel Islands. The Hugos would live there for the next 20 years, and it was during this time that Adèle's life would change, for the worse. Adèle's story begins to become distinct from the lives of the rest of the Hugo family following their relocation to the Channel Islands. A year and a half after arriving to the archipelago, which were then and still are a British territory, despite their proximity to the French mainland, she met Albert Pinson, known to his friends as Bertie. He was a junior officer in the British Army who was 22 years of age at the time to Adèle's 24. He began courting her, and the following year he proposed to her. Things then took a strange turn. Adèle initially rejected his offer of marriage, perhaps because her parents disapproved of Pinson, who was fond of both drinking and gambling. But then, in the course of 1856, she had a change of heart. Pinson, though, did not have the reaction she had hoped for. Pinson was no longer interested, in large part because when Adèle began pursuing him, her behaviour had changed. She was now displaying signs of some form of mental illness, one which is believed today to have been schizophrenia. It was the beginning of a long and painful mental decline, and how she lived the next 15 years of her life will shock you. The rest of the Hugo family, as we have seen, would continue to live on in Guernsey through the 1850s and the entirety of the 1860s before returning to France. Adèle was not with them throughout many of these years. From 1856 onwards, she visited England frequently in her pursuit of Captain Pinson, who was stationed between London and his regiment in the county of Bedfordshire, in eastern England. Adèle followed him here not long afterwards. This was the beginning of a period of nearly a decade and a half, during which she stalked the young captain across several countries and continents. Historians have identified that Adèle was suffering from erotomania, a condition which causes a person to become convinced that someone who is actually disinterested in them is obsessed with them. Of course, this condition is responsible for many stalking cases in the modern world. Adèle's pursuit of Pinson was nothing if not colourful. He did not remain for long in Bedfordshire, and was subsequently sent to Ireland, at that time a constituent part of the United Kingdom. He would remain stationed around Britain and Ireland until 1861, something which at least ensured that Adèle's infatuation with Pinson kept her in the relative proximity to the Channel Islands and her parents. However, beginning in the early 1860s, he was appointed to a series of positions overseas. These included the city of Halifax in Nova Scotia in Canada, which prior to 1867 was still a series of full British colonies, as well as a stint on the island of Barbados in the Caribbean. Adèle followed him to both locations overseas. During these years, her mental state was declining exponentially. While in Halifax, her behaviour became even more obsessive, regularly visiting the barracks and harassing Captain Pinson. He constantly rejected her and even extorted money from her. Despite all this, Adèle wouldn't stop, and she went so far as to consult a hypnotist to put him into a trance and force him to marry her. During this time, her mother's health was deteriorating, and her family begged her to return home. Adèle, though, couldn't stay away from Pinson, and was certain he would soon propose. Then, in late 1863, she wrote to her parents that she had finally married Pinson, and her father announced the news in the local paper. Yet, they later found out that this was a lie. 3 years later, Pinson was stationed in Barbados, and Adèle, of course, soon followed. While in Barbados, she referred to herself as Madame Pinson, despite the fact that the captain would soon marry another woman. Adèle was known to wander the streets muttering to herself, and had started to show little interest in maintaining herself, eating infrequently and neglecting her own physical health. While living in Barbados, her mental decline was so severe that she stopped writing in the diary that she had kept while living in the Channel Islands and Halifax. Also, Adèle hardly ever corresponded with her parents back in Europe, and so they were unable to track her activities and well-being. Because of this, we are limited in the amount of information concerning her life in Barbados, but there is enough evidence from later accounts of those who observed her on the island to know what happened to her. Still undeterred, Adèle tried to establish contact repeatedly with Pinson, directly and through letters, but despite some brief interactions, it seemed like there was no possibility of any kind of the relationship redeveloping between them. So, would this finally put an end to Adèle's stalking of Pinson? Adèle finally gave up her pursuit of Captain Pinson in the early 1870s, after he had returned to Europe and married Catherine Edith Roxburgh, the daughter of a senior commander in the military. Their union soon resulted in a child, all developments which Adèle, even in her weak mental state, could not ignore. And so in 1872, at 41 years of age, she returned to France. There her father had also finally relocated to Paris after the nearly 2-decade-long reign of Emperor Napoleon III, who abdicated his throne late in 1870 in the midst of the Franco-Prussian War. A few years prior, in 1868, while Adèle was pursuing Pinson, her mother had died. In the French capital once again, Adèle joined her father, but upon spending time with her, he soon realized that she was in a terrible mental state, and decided to have her committed to a series of asylums where she would live out the rest of her long life, notably in Saint-Mandé and Suresnes, 2 suburbs of Paris. Victor continued to support her until his death in 1885. There she displayed symptoms of severe schizophrenia, such as hallucinations, and often didn't recognize acquaintances who visited her, traumatized by both her experiences in her youth fleeing France, her doomed pursuit of Pinson, and also the deaths of several of her siblings prematurely. She was the only one of her father's 5 children still alive at the time of his death in 1885. Adèle wasn't the only member of the Hugo family to suffer from mental illness. Her paternal uncle, Adèle Hugo, is also believed to have had schizophrenia and fell into depression and madness after his younger brother married his secret love. This, of course, was Adèle's mother. The esteemed French journalist and writer Gustave Simon remembered Adèle in her later years at the convalescent homes in Saint-Mandé and Suresnes, where she spent much of the second half of her life. He described a woman who was relatively lucid and willing to talk about her early life, sharing fond memories of her father and the cultural figures she had known in Paris, all signs that her condition did improve over the years. She had a great love of music and what Simon called old-school composers. She played music herself and read voraciously in French, Latin and Greek. As such, it was not an entirely sad life that she lived here down to her death on the 21st of April 1915, at 84 years of age. Adèle was subsequently buried at Villequier churchyard in the region of Normandy, where her sister Leopoldine had drowned nearly 3/4 of a century earlier. Curiously, Captain Pinson died just a few months after she did. There has been considerable interest ever since she was alive herself in Adèle's story. In particular, her relationship with Pinson has garnered extensive attention. The most striking example of this was the appearance in 1975 of a film on the subject, directed by the great French New Wave director François Truffaut. The story of Adèle H. starred a 20-year-old Isabelle Adjani as Adèle in the role that launched her career. The film's depiction of her doomed relationship with the captain garnered critical acclaim. Adjani was nominated for an Oscar in the Best Actress category, the youngest nominee in the award's history at that time. Adèle's story was also the subject of numerous books over the last several decades. It has been retold with fresh perspective in a book by Mark Bostridge, In Pursuit of Love, just published in 2024. Thus, while her life story was tragic, Adèle Hugo's tale continues to fascinate over a century and a half after her doomed pursuit of Captain Pinson. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Adèle Hugo. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also be sure to let me know down below in the comments. If you want more videos like this, also let me know, and I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.